All right. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to Curator Refresh. Refresh is a fast-paced coaching call we host every Monday at 1 p.m. to provide value to your business, help you grow faster, teach you new technology ideas, marketing strategies. We want to keep you guys on the cutting edge of what's out there in the marketing space. Do me a favor if you could. I want to make sure the audio and the visuals are coming through loud and clear. So if you, in the chat, just say hello, where you're calling in from. Let us know where you're dialing in today. We got a special treat for you today. We're going to talk about storytelling, but I want to make sure the audio is working and the visuals are coming through. And it looks good. Hey, Brian, welcome. Hey, Anne-Marie. Good to see you on the call today. Hey, man. All right, awesome. Looks like everything's coming through loud and clear on your end here, guys. Excellent. What's up, Brandon? All right, our man, Nick. Star of the week last week, Nick. Hey, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you. All right, so listen, guys, today we have a special treat. I got my friend Melanie Deziel, who I had on the water cooler many months ago, coming back on a private 101 session with you guys to talk about storytelling. You know, I think right now, if you think about the buzzwords of 2019, story was one of those big buzzwords. Everyone was talking about tell better stories, tell more stories, connect with your consumers in more meaningful ways. But what most people failed to do was to turn the corner and answer the question, how? Because that's essentially at the essence of what we have to do as marketers is we have to be able to take an idea like tell better stories, and we got to be able to codify that and turn that into a strategy. And that's ultimately what we hope to accomplish in today's live session with you is to turn the corner and say, how do you actually tell stories that drive real results for your business? How do you create the framework and the techniques needed to be able to reach consumers in a meaningful way, to create that emotional connection that stories have the ability to do for your business? If you guys don't know, Melanie Deziel is the founder of Storyfuel. We had her on the water cooler a few months ago. She's the author of the Content Fuel Framework, How to Generate Endless Story Ideas. Melanie, thank you so much for joining us today on Curator Refresh. This is a blast for me to have you back on the air with our customers, and I can't wait to get into today's session.
Yeah, I'm psyched to be back and joining you for a session here. Ready to dive in.
Excellent, excellent. So I know you have slides pulled up, so I can go ahead and actually pass it over to you, and I'll be able to manage the slides here on your end, and you should be good to go.
Sounds good. Let's jump in.
Excellent. And just real quickly, as we're pulling it up, if you guys have any questions for today's session, I'll be monitoring the chat live on the air. So any questions for Melanie, I'll be able to jump in and hopefully answer them throughout today's session or at the end if we have time. So feel free to drop any questions you have in the live chat. I will personally be monitoring it this week live on the air. All right, Melanie, the floor is yours.
A man of many talents. Here we go. Go ahead and go to the first slide for us here. So one of the things that we see so often in marketing, like Jimmy was just saying, is that we spend so much time telling our audience things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we tell them we have a new listing, we tell them they should come see it, we tell them how awesome we are, how awesome our listings are, right? But we don't generally spend enough time showing them why they should care about those things. And that's really the disconnect, right? The best journalists know that what you have to do to get your audience to care is show them and have them come to a conclusion on their own. So let me give you an example here that comes from my background. If I wanted you to care, for example, that the American prison system needs to be reformed in a way that assists women who are in the system, I could show you a stat like this. I could say over the past 3 decades, the number of women serving time in American prisons has risen more than 8-fold. Right. So there's just a stat. We see this kind of thing all the time in marketing where we grab some sort of statistic. Maybe it's our close rate, our sell rate, the average time where we have listings on the market. Right. We use these stats because we feel the stats are compelling. But oftentimes for our consumers, like you may be feeling with this stat here, it's really hard for us to conceptualize what that means for our lives. So maybe you see this stat and you're like 8-fold compared to what, right? What's the impact to me in my life? Instead of that, I could try showing you a chart, right? Maybe make it more visual. We know that visual messages often engage our audience a little more deeply. So this is that same stat that I showed you a moment ago, but put on a chart. So now you see that real sharp increase. You see where it climbs high like that. So for you, seeing this stat for the first time, seeing it as a chart, you think, okay, I understand this a little bit better now. I can see how that rise is obviously pretty big. That obviously has some meaning there, some importance. But here again, it's still just pixels on a screen, right? How are we going to take something that we need to convey to our audience and make a real human connection? What I could do instead is tell you the story of this woman you see here on your screen. This is Rusty Miller Hill. She is a woman from my hometown, New York City. And as a young woman, she kind of got mixed up in the wrong crowd. She had 3 young children at home, and the father of her children was not around to help her raise them. She found herself having to make some tough choices to try to make sure that she could keep them fed, keep a roof over their head. And in getting mixed up in the wrong crowd, Rusty was present while a drug deal took place. She was ultimately sentenced to 2 years in prison for having been present while that activity was happening. And during that time, her children were put into foster care. So Rusty served her time. She volunteered inside the prison. She did her sentence. And when she got out of prison 2 years later, she learned that her children in the foster care system had been adopted. And Rusty hasn't seen her kids in 20 years. My guess is that story, hearing Rusty's story, touches your heart in a way that a chart or a statistic with numbers on a screen just can't do. And that is the difference between showing your audience something and telling them, right? So when we think about the way we need to communicate with our audience, are we telling them things, giving them statistics, showing them charts, or are we showing them why this information is truly important to them? So show, don't tell, you see here on the screen, show, don't tell is one of the very first things they teach you in journalism school. I don't know if anyone's a former journalist or went through that journalism track at some point in your life. Maybe you wrote for your high school or college newspaper. Let us know in the chat, because this is a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here today, is taking those best practices from the world of journalism and applying them to the way we tell our marketing stories so that we too can create these deep connections. So they teach us in J school that when you show your audience something, what you're doing is painting a picture for them, helping them to see all the detail about a topic or a person or an event, and allowing them to draw their own conclusions. Because the fact of the matter is, everybody loves their own ideas, right? We love our own ideas. We would much rather come to a conclusion on our own than be told by someone else. No one really likes to be marketed to. No one likes to be sold, right? So we have to do it in a little bit more of an elegant way by showing them, painting these beautiful pictures, giving them all the details, and allowing their mind, their hearts to come to those decisions on their own. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how do we put our audience at the center of the stories that we tell, because that's what journalists really do. Most journalists, and again, if any of you come from that background, you know exactly what I'm talking about. What we do as journalists is we try to gather information on behalf of our audience, and then we try to deliver that information to the audience in a way that's really easy for them to understand. We know that it doesn't matter our personal opinions about a person, an event, a place. A good journalist knows to remain objective and to just try to educate our audience as much as possible. And that's exactly why some of the best stories, the ones that touch our hearts, that change conversations, that change minds, they're the stories that follow some of these best practices that we're going to talk about today. So what we're going to do is we're going to use TRUTH as our acronym. So I find that acronyms are really helpful. They help remind us of these things in the moments when we may forget, right? Because the last thing we want to do is talk through these best practices here and then forget about them 2 hours from now, right? So hopefully this will help serve as a checklist for you to remember what these 5 best practices are, so that anytime you find yourself facing a story or a message that you need to convey to your audience, you can come back to this checklist. You can remember these 5 best practices, and we're going to dive into the very first one right now. So the T in our TRUTH acronym stands for teach. This one is really, really fun. So in so many instances, we're trying to teach our audience something. And I think oftentimes we forget about that. We think we're just trying to share a message. We want them to understand what it is that we want to tell them. But in many cases, what we need to do is actually educate our audience so that they can become a more informed customer. My guess is that you guys are already doing this in your one-on-one interactions with your audience. They have questions about the process. They are doing something sometimes for the first time that you do every day, right? So they're not as experienced as we are, and they often need our help through our messaging, through our content, to become educated enough on this process that they feel comfortable to become customers and not just members of our audience, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can teach your audience. The really great thing about educational content when we teach our audience something through our storytelling is that it lasts a really long time. Because one of the things I know is true for all of us, we only have so many hours in a day. We only have so many things we can spend our time on. So it's very important that when we're investing our time, our money, our resources into creating this content, that it's going to keep working for us for a long time, right? That's always the goal. We want it to stick around. We want it to keep working for us. Educational content is what in the journalism world we would call evergreen. So like the trees that stay around all year long, evergreen content is as relevant today as it will be tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. So there's a lot of really good examples of ways we can teach our audience. And I want to walk through some of those on the next slide here. So when you're thinking about some of the things you could teach your audience, here's some ways you can do it. You could teach them about a particular subject. So there might be a subject that they need to learn more about, some kind of topic that they need to just get some more information about. And we would call that a deep dive, where you're talking all about a single topic for a long time, whether that's a long article you might be creating or a long video or a piece of audio that they're going to listen to and watch for a long time. But you can also teach them about a process. And I think this is something that we can do particularly well as realtors, right? There are, again, like I said, so many processes that we are familiar with as professionals, but that our audience may be much less familiar with. For some of them, and I saw this in so many of your success stories and the content you're creating when I was preparing to talk to you all today, you're already doing this on some level, finding opportunities to educate the audience about each step of the process that they face or that they may face throughout, your time working together. So looking for processes that you can walk your audience through in your content is a really valuable way to make sure that you're teaching them as much as possible, helping them become more informed, and therefore helping them become more comfortable to work with you. You could also teach them about people. And so a big part of what many of you are doing with your success stories is talking about the customers and clients that you've been able to create amazing results for, right? This is a big part of what we do. In all industries, it's important, but especially so because of the word of mouth power in real estate. We want to show that we've helped people just like them either sell their homes or find their perfect home. And so being able to do that by sharing stories of our customers is incredibly important. So doing profiles and features. I want to share that there are other people you may be creating stories about as well. So not just your customers, but other people with, employees and members of your practice, of your firm. You could also talk to other members of your community. So some of you did this very well by bringing in, local business owners, local politicians, people who form the fabric of the communities where you're trying to become a solid part. By sharing their stories, you help signal what's important to you, your values, and who's a part of your circle as well, so that they may want to become a part of that circle too. The last one is the organization, right? So talking about history of your particular firm, of your own background, right? If you are an organization of one, talking about your background as well. All of these are opportunities to just educate your audience on parts of this process of people and processes that they may be less familiar with. The more informed they feel, again, the more comfortable they're going to be to continue working with you. So we've got two examples here that come from within the network. So Jimmy, I'm hoping that you'll recognize some of your folks here and help add some more context, but this was really wonderful. I found this particular example. This is the Connie and Dan Carlson's YouTube channel. They have a whole coffee with Connie option here, a playlist that they've created on YouTube. So if you look at these options here, they're sharing buyer trends, they're sharing pros and cons, right, of the particular area, 5 ways to ace a move with kids, right? So they're understanding that these are processes that they can help educate the audience on and make them feel more comfortable. And it seems like this kind of content is something that a lot of your partners are creating, Jimmy.
Yeah, well, there's one thing to add there, and it's, I think, probably essential to why I think Connie and Dan have done so well with their videos in terms of sort of the effectiveness of them. Is first, the fact is that they're using video as a method to communicate, or that's their medium, right? So video in real estate is sort of what we believe to be sort of the best way for an agent to be able to, on the fly, be able to communicate an idea without having to slow down and write sort of an in-depth piece, which is sort of outside their area of expertise in a lot of cases. But what I love about what Connie does, and what I think the Zen takeaway for me is she doesn't just stick to one particular type of content, one angle. You gave the example just a moment ago with Teach. You talked about deep dive, DIY, profiles, history, behind the scenes. If everything I do is, let's say, community, and there's nothing that's like about the business of buying and selling a real estate, or maybe the problems or mistakes you're going to make in the process, what happens is you can sort of unintentionally back into becoming like a neighborhood guide or like, Travelocity or TripAdvisor, and they don't associate you with that expertise that you really want them to have. You want them to have both, obviously, like you serve this area, but the expertise is a huge part of that, Melanie, making sure that's represented in the content that's being produced.
Exactly. And that's why the teaching thing is so important. So when it comes time for you to share these messages, to communicate with your audience, not only saying, hey, I know this area, but I am an expert in this area. Exactly like you said, right? Talking not just about the community, but the parts of the process like you see here, moving, all the related parts, the related content, how you can educate your audience and make that process easier. On the next slide, I just want to show you another way you can bring this to life. So if you're sitting there thinking this is really intimidating for me, either I'm just getting into this or I'm still getting started, or the prospect of making an entire YouTube channel is a little intimidating right now, want to point out that there's opportunities for you to teach your audience something in small ways in the content you're already creating as well. So this could be as simple as, like you see here, putting a top buying tip in another piece of content, right? So adding one tiny educational element to a piece of content you may already be creating. Could be as simple as, tweeting out once a week a particular tip for the whole process, posting it on other social platforms. You don't have to necessarily create an entire curriculum for your audience if that feels too intimidating and out of reach. Just look for small opportunities whenever you create content. How can I make this a little bit more educational? How could I teach my audience just a little something extra in this piece of content that I'm creating?
And one thing just to add there, and maybe our team can drop a link to Scott Euler's blog post he wrote on the Buy Bees top buying tip, but this was actually originally a success story. And the thing that Scott did so exceptionally well that everyone needs to steal right now is he actually brought in a professional photographer, like a lifestyle shoot of the customer at the house as they close. So the photos in that original blog post look amazing because it's actually a professional photographer taking pictures of the family. And it was a perfect family for that situation. We'll find the article and we'll share it in the chat right now. But to me, we talked about video just a moment ago, Melanie, like using high quality images that go along with your story, that visualization certainly helps sort of make this thing just stand out in a much better way, in my opinion.
Excellent. Jimmy, do we have any questions on the first T in our truth acronym here on teaching before we move on to the next one?
No, we're ready to move on, but let me just add one more thing before we transition to one of my favorite books. You guys need to all write this down. It's called Challenger Sale. I read it last February. I read like 10 sales books in like 1 month, right? And it was, I did sort of this like focus training. So the book I read was Challenger Sale. And one of the things that they said in the book, Melanie, and that they did a massive study about professional salespeople to identify what are the characteristics of professional salespeople that can help correlate with their success at scale, right? And one of the things they found is that you got certain salespeople who are the relationship builders, who they try to become your best friend. You got certain salespeople who are the lone wolf. These are the ones who just they don't enter anything into the CRM. They just do what, and somehow they kind of hit their quota. But they identified a type of salesperson called the Challenger Sale, which is this individual had the ability to outperform across the board every other type of salesperson. And one of the key characteristics they had was their ability to teach, tailor, and take control. That was the sort of 3 T's for this challenge sale. But the ability, as not only we're talking about marketing right now, Melanie, but in sales, to apply this to sales, to teach people something, is where you can establish that kind of emotional connection and value add that we're all looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And the things we're talking about today, I mean, obviously we're presenting this in the context of marketing, in the context of content that we create for our audience. But what you'll find is that a lot of these principles you can use in other communication areas of your life. Honestly, you could use this when you're networking at an event. You can use this to build relationships. Really what we're talking about here is how do we tell compelling stories? How do we create more compelling and trustworthy communications? And that can obviously come to life in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely. All right, cool. We'll keep it rolling here, Melanie.
All right. So the next one is reputable. So obviously what we want is to create trust with our audience, right? So all of what we're doing, especially for a big major life decision like changing homes, right? This is a time when trust is incredibly important. And there's a lot of ways we can build that. One of the ways that's a little unconventional that I want to show you guys is actually including other people's opinions, right? So many times in our content, we feel like we have to rely only on our own expertise, our own opinions, our own thoughts. But what you'll notice is when you read most good journalistic content, content in magazines, newspapers, and on the websites that you know and trust, Very rarely is the journalist giving their own thoughts on anything. In fact, unless it's opinion writing, we're not even supposed to include our own opinions, right? So what you find there is it becomes your mission to find who are the most qualified experts to bring into this piece of content to share their opinions, right? The qualified and reputable experts. So here are some examples of folks that you could bring into your content, whether it's folks who are going to appear on video, be quoted in a blog post, appear on your social channels, or even be a part of an actual interaction you're having with customers in real life. Again, this extends beyond just our content creation. Here are some ways you can find those people. Number one, you can always look to academic sources. So what I mean by this is familiarize yourself with the local universities, colleges, community colleges. Find out who are the people who are teaching and researching on the subjects that are important to you, right? Find out people who are experts in these particular fields. Find professionals who are doing this kind of work, not just you. Many of you probably, if you either have kids or you have nephews, nieces that you engage with, because I said so works really well with kids, right? But not so much with our customers. So being able to back up everything we say with another expert's opinion is really, really helpful. So find those other experts in your local community, academic or otherwise. I want to point out validated is important as well. So even if you have your own, maybe you've done a focus group, you've done some sort of research, some sort of study, maybe you're analyzing your own past data. It's always good to get that gut checked with someone else. So what I mean is, if you are looking at your data and you say, based on what I see, the trends are X, Y, and Z. Well, your data may be particularly tilted or biased in a way that you're not even aware of, right? So you may want to just check that data with a third-party source, an outside expert, and say, hey, based on my data, I'm looking at our sales data over the last several months, and here's what I'm seeing. What do you think? Is that consistent with what you're seeing elsewhere? Does this reflect broader trends in the industry? So always gut check with that third party. Next parts here are for familiar. So familiar sources are important too. There are people in your community, whether those are local influencers, business owners, again, politicians, people about town that are well known. These folks tend to have a trust established with your audience as well. So insofar as you could bring those trustworthy voices into your content, it does sort of extend their halo of influence to you, which is always a nice bonus. So look for those familiar influencers from around town, around the county, in the area who may be able to add some credibility to your content and sort of extend their halo of influence to you. And the last point here on bringing in sources is to remember diversity. So this is a tough one. They teach us this in journalism school. I remember we were told, especially as students, your inclination is to look to people who are around you, right? So people you share classes with, people who might be, living in your dorm. And so the rule they gave us is you can never quote anyone you know. And the reason is we often know very similar people to us. And so what that means is we'd be quoting people just like us and leaving out a large segment of our audience. So when you're thinking about who to feature in your success stories, when you're thinking about the experts you want to bring in, make sure that they represent the full diversity of your audience or your ideal audience so that they all feel represented and they can see themselves in your content. For example, if you were doing a ton of customer stories and every customer story you featured was a family with children, then maybe if I don't have children, I might think, well, this person can't help me, right? They're really good at placing families, but maybe they can't help me and my husband without children find our ideal home, right? So making sure that you're representing diversity in all of those ways so that all potential customers that you want to have in your family, right, are invited in because they see someone who feels like them, who has a similar experience to them.
If I could add one thing there, Melanie, just the first thing, just give you a couple ideas, because as you're talking through this, a couple of thoughts came into my mind. The first thing is, building a network of people to get quotes from sounds like a really smart idea. The mayor, the top politicians in the area. Hey, we're doing an article on housing trends. What does the mayor think about the local market, right? And everyone likes to be quoted. So building up your sources there is super helpful. The second thing that came to mind is through Instagram, you certainly can see who the most popular people are posting on Instagram that are relevant to your brand or align with your brand. So you can be able to search in your local area, who are the top influencers on Instagram, and you theoretically could say, this person is always touring restaurants, right? Let me go ahead and say, here are the, according to the number one influencer in Hingham, Massachusetts. What's up, Susanna? Here is their top 3 favorite spots, right? So if you're doing community posts, not your favorite spots, but the number one Instagram influencer's favorite spots. The third thing that came to mind is we do a lot of consumer research here at Curator where we talk to actually sellers and buyers. And one of the things that drives their decision-making process is exactly what you're referring to, which is how much do they trust? How reputable is this agent? And I recently worked to hire a data scientist at Curator, maybe 6 months ago. And in this space, hiring a data scientist is like hiring a realtor. There's a bunch of them that are out there who do a terrible job, and there's a few that are exceptionally good. And finding out the difference between the two, because they all kind of speak the same language, is incredibly challenging. So Curator customers are like good data scientists. The industry is full of bad data scientists, right? So what I did is I started asking around, and what happened was multiple people told me and mentioned the person in who I hired, and that actual, like, this is a big decision for us. And so, like, the fact that I got third-party recommendations and referrals mentioning the same person on that sort of short list actually drove my decision. And that's how consumers hire professional services. They need to have that sort of reputation. So the thought that comes to my mind here is sort of brand through association, meaning if in your area there are brands and businesses that are well-known, super reputable brands that everyone is aware of, that you can sort of lean into that. So by association, if you're mentioning them and they're mentioning you, it provides a lot more credibility to your story or to your brand. It's sort of more where my thought goes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to exactly the type of example you said, someone who's big on Instagram, who's touring local restaurants. It could be the person who's in charge of the local running club who you're going to meet up with, and they're going to share the best running routes around town. It doesn't have to be just the mayor or like some huge name that maybe feels out of reach for you. It could be the person, who knows the neighborhoods better than the people who deliver the newspapers, right? So look for some of those people who don't always get in the spotlight, but probably, really know the area well and can be cited as reputable sources.
Love it.
So we've got two examples here. We're back with the Euler Group, right? This is the Bibees, that same success story. So just another good example of, sharing a customer story, bringing in, instead of saying all of my customers are very happy, everyone loves to work with me, and I'm very successful, right? Find customers who can say that for you. It is way more compelling when it comes from someone else. Again, most of you are doing a great job with this already, but just underscoring the importance of bringing outside voices to say those things. And then on the next slide, we actually have an example of someone bringing someone in from the community. So this is, this group was doing a sort of a tour of different places around town.
Yeah, this is Tracy Jennings. They're doing some really amazing work with their community profile videos.
Exactly. Great community profile videos, bringing in, talking about the different businesses and their favorite restaurants, places around town. A really good way to show that not only are they a part of the community, but the community knows and trusts them as well, right? Because they were willing to work together on this content. So really great way to kind of bring in those faces and voices, and reminding, again, it doesn't have to be someone super famous, that even just local business owners and people who work in the community can be seen as valuable and trustworthy sources. All right, so on to our third one. So the U is for uniqueness. So this is one of the things that comes up very often, is people feel like, well, there's so many of us, and if we're all trying to create some of this community content, for example, we can't all go and interview, the owner of the best pizza shop in town. That's not going to be differentiated. How do we stick out? How do we break through the noise in a very crowded market or in a very crowded content space, right? That becomes a challenge. So the U is to remind us, how can we find a way to tell a story that is unique or is told in a unique way? So on the next slide, I have some examples for you. The first thing you always want to look for is, anytime you're telling a story, ask if there's a first or only element of this, right? So this could be whether you're creating a listing. Is this the first or only home in the area that has some particular characteristic or feature? Is this the first or only time a sale of this type has happened or in this neighborhood? Look for those first or only elements, because this is what sticks out to us in our heads and makes us think, this is different, right? This is the first person to do this, or the first, the only listing that has a particular characteristic. These will stick out on their own.
Can I stop you real quick there? Because there's an idea that came through my mind here. And this is the way I want you guys thinking about this. And guys, give up some love here in the chat for Melanie. This is a master class on how to tell better stories. And the value of a story, by the way, just to be clear, is that it actually amplifies your marketing to the next level and helps you reach consumers, build an emotional connection, helps you actually stand out in a crowded marketplace. Like, what we always obsess over here at Curator, Melanie, is like, we want to push the envelope here. We want to be the most innovative marketing company in this space. There's literally nobody who's talking about what we're talking about today in our industry, and I think our audience is absolutely loving this. But the idea of first and only, let me just give you a really practical example of this before you move on to the superlatives here. if a property is literally the only property in a particular price range, that's like a hot price range that's been listed in the last 7 days, theoretically, you could be saying something like, hey, listen, this is the only home that's been listed in this price range in the last 30 days. Like that's like, it's just that it becomes an extension of what we're already doing. And this is actually one of the things that got me so excited about when you and I in the past have talked about storytelling, is like the ability to make it an extension of what we already promote every day, just doing it better. The first only, there's kind of countless examples of how you can apply this to a listing promotion. I just think you have to look at as you were saying, the characteristics of the home, the price point, the location. Can we find an angle there that can really help elevate the uniqueness of this property to help it stand out, which is ultimately the goal of everyone who's listening on today's call.
Definitely. Exactly. That's exactly what you need to be looking for. And I do want to note, sometimes people say, well, it's not the first or the only in this particular area. Well, other superlatives will do as well. Is it the biggest, the oldest, the newest, the whatever est, right? Like look for those superlatives. What other ways does this property differentiate itself? Same thing with your success stories, right? So many times our success stories, if you're doing them often or for a long period of time, you might feel, these are starting to sound the same. You can ask these same questions about those sales, about those success stories, to see how can I find that first, only, or other superlative element about it, right? If you can't seem to find a superlative, another thing you can ask is, what is different or surprising about this element, about this listing or this success story? So this is often, okay, in looking at this listing or this success story, I might expect one thing, but the opposite is true. So if you could find one of those different or surprising elements, you're looking at this house, you may think that it needs to be in this price range, but it's not. Or you're looking at this home, you might think that it was built, in this particular time range, but actually it was built in this other time range, right? So there might be unique elements that you can draw in by seeing what's surprising about a home, what's the opposite of what people would expect. The other thing that's interesting is if a journey or a perspective is different. So what I mean by that is sometimes the story behind something, even if the final product, maybe the final listing or the final home doesn't seem to have that unique element, maybe it has an interesting story behind it, right? So this is like like digging into the background, the history, the architect. There may be some element sort of hidden in the history that makes it special, even if you wouldn't see that when you're sort of looking at it from the outside. And the last note on uniqueness is sometimes we can stand out by telling a similar story in a different way. So what I mean by that is, if every other listing is just photos and written content, well, maybe if you come in with drone video, or you come in with video at all, that's going to help you stand out. Maybe if you have an audio tour that allows people to listen as you read the listing to them, just so they can listen to the listing, that would help you stand out. Maybe you have some 360 photos, or virtual reality. I mean, there's lots of ways you can be a little bit different, but finding ways to stand out and do something a little bit different in terms of the way you deliver your content, even if the listing, the success story, the topic of your content is not in it of itself unique, you can find that uniqueness by telling it and delivering it in a different way. So you've got one example of that here. I know that a lot of you are being encouraged to please use video whenever you can. We know that video is highly engaging. So instead of just doing a Monday market update, that's a few bullet points in a blog post, delivering that same information inside of a video allows you to stand out in a sea of other written market reports, right? So this is a great example of finding a unique format to tell a story that others may be telling, or that maybe you have told in the past too. Jimmy, are there other examples of this where you're encouraging people to use kind of different formats to kind of stand out from amongst the crowd?
Yeah, we're seeing there's a couple that kind of just come to mind for me. We're seeing people starting to use podcasts, which is really fun, and this is sort of be more of a professional sort of like going to agent. That being said, like we have to understand that consumers do listen to podcasts as well, clearly, and also like if you're in business in any capacity, the percentage of consumers who are listening to podcasts daily is growing, sort of exponentially year over year. So the idea to translate the content you're producing into a real estate podcast is something actually sort of right there for everybody. I've been promoting for a long time, video in terms of pre-recorded YouTube videos are excellent ways for evergreen content to be posted online that can exist for, a long period of time and add value. I've also been a huge advocate of going live, which is the ability to kind of go live in the moment. Because going live allows you to kind of capture the attention of anyone who's sort of in that space at that time. It kind of allows you to sort of take over the feed. And what's interesting is that on Facebook in particular, Melanie, the average Facebook video view is pretty pathetic. It's, under a few seconds typically. But what we find with our Facebook Lives is that we can captures people's attention for 10 or 12 or 15 minutes on Facebook Live.
That's great.
Which is incredible compared to sort of pre-recorded stuff that's posted. Like, I want to be really clear for our audience, just a quick pro tip here. The use of video ads on Facebook is a big opportunity when done really well with high quality that drives you to a specific landing page. But if you're trying to promote 5 or 10 minute long videos that are pre-recorded, it just doesn't really stick because there's too much distractions. YouTube's a much better place for that. But going live is a good example, Melanie, where you can kind of take the same idea and apply it in a different method.
Absolutely. And there are other formats you can use as well. We're not going to go super deep on this, but you could create a map, right? How many of you have created maps that show either the highlights around town, some of your community content, or, just making recommendations of the area? Maps are really useful. Timelines, so you could show the history of a particular listing, different ownership, when it was built, when things may have been transferred. Timelines are a great way to do it. Quizzes are a highly engaging way to engage with your audience. Test their knowledge of the local community, test knowledge of a listing before they come in for a tour, right? There's lots of fun ways you can use totally different formats to just mix it up, engage your audience in a different way. And again, using a different format, an unexpected format, allows you to stand out in a sea of content sameness. So that's always going to be a perk for us when we're trying to connect with our audience.
Yeah, love it.
All right. So on to the next T. So the next T in our TRUTH acronym, remember we talked about teaching, using reputable sources, finding the unique element, and now we're going to talk about tension. So here I'm not talking about, like starting a Twitter battle with a fellow agent in town, or, taking a stand on some issue that is, a social issue outside of your realm. We're not trying to create controversy, right? Controversy is different. What we're talking about with tension is understanding that we have to figure out what's at stake for our audience. Why should our audience care? Because the reality is all of us, and just like our customers, we get on into our inbox, we go onto Facebook, we go to all these places where we're trying to communicate with our audience, and they didn't wake up and ask what content we were going to deliver to them today, right? They are in it for themselves. They want to see the content that's compelling. They want to learn. They want to laugh. They want to feel something. And so if our content doesn't take what matters to them into account, we are not going to make it. We're not going to be up to snuff, and they're going to scroll past or click past or swipe past or whatever else, right? So we need to figure out what's at stake for our audience. Why should they care? And we need to, just like Jimmy said, we can attach this to the content we're already creating, find a way to put the tension back into whatever it is we create. So I'll give you a few examples of how to do that. First, base your content on audience questions. In general, when we ask a question, it's because we want to know the answer. So if our audience is asking questions, we can create content that answers those questions, and that will sort of have their caring built in. So you could look for these questions on your social media, in your email, anyone who's interfacing with your clients, whether that's customer service, sales teams, etc., whoever is talking to the clients, talking to the audience, probably has a good idea of the kinds of questions you get. So if your audience, again, is asking these kinds of questions, then it's a really good way for you to know, if I create content that answers that question, my audience will definitely care about it. So audience questions is a really good place to start. If you aren't getting audience questions, I want to suggest one tool that is free and really fun to use. It's called Answer the Public. So answerthepublic.com. You go in there, you can type in perhaps your town or, a couple other keywords related to what you're doing, what you're selling, and you'll see what it returns is a really cool visual list of all the questions people ask related to those keywords. So you may play around with it a little bit, try a couple different keywords, see what you get. But again, a really sort of free and easy tool for you to punch in some keywords and see exactly the questions that people ask when it comes to that particular topic. And once you know, you can create content that answers those questions, and you will know that your audience cares about the answers.
So can we just stop real quick? Because I want to actually show the audience this tool. This tool is like absolutely worth the price of admission today, because I'm pulling it up right now. It's unbelievable.
It's called cool.
Answerthepublic.com. Let's pull it up right now for our community. And I'm going to go ahead and just type in the word real estate. First off, very cool video here in the background. And what you're saying here is, so you basically have just given our entire community content for the next millennium here. So if I scroll down here, you can see the visualization of
It's a big
how,
one, this one.
yeah, and we probably could break that like selling my home or something more specific, right? But
Yes,
like you can see how this
definitely.
sort of breaks down, and I'm assuming you can sort of just click into this and you can see all the actual searches for that particular keyword phrase.
Exactly. So as you scroll down, you'll even see it visualized in different ways. So it'll show you, certain questions. It'll show you common, similar searches that people look for. It shows it visualized in all different ways. You could look at an alphabetical list. So it may seem a little overwhelming, but the idea here is just to get you started thinking
Mm-hmm.
about different ways. When people search for real estate, they search for the following questions. What I would definitely suggest is if everyone here on this webinar and every real estate agent in the entire earth uses real estate, right, you're all going to be creating content that is heavily competitive. You're
Yeah.
fighting for those clicks. I would recommend looking for the ones that are closer to your area. So homes in Boston, selling Boston home, right? So
Mm-hmm.
look for some of those things. There is a limit to the free reports. So obviously, Jimmy, you've been playing around
I'm
with
like
this tool
signing
a
up for
little
this
bit.
right now. Sorry. Go ahead.
You've
We're
been
gonna.
playing around with it a little bit, but it is a really good free tool. You don't have to generally upgrade. You can, as long as you think of some of your searches in advance, you can generally do a couple a day and still be able to check it
I'm
out.
gonna log into
Um,
incognito mode here on another computer, see if I can start keep asking questions.
there you go. Yeah, have some of your teammates, your family do some searches for you. But it is a really valuable tool. So I would
Mm-hmm.
definitely recommend finding some questions via that tool as well.
Love it. All right. I'm sorry. I got us off track there.
No problem. All right, so the next one is risks or benefits. And what I mean here is not being dramatic. We're not trying to scare our audience, but we have to acknowledge that the things we help them with do have some heavy risks associated, right? There's a lot of risks associated with maybe not doing this correctly the first time, not having the right information, not asking the right questions. So what we want to do is make sure that we find ways to acknowledge the benefit of working with us or the risk of doing something inappropriately or incorrectly. Because if they do that, we help them understand this is why this matters to me, because I want to avoid those bad outcomes or I want to secure those good outcomes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the next thing you could do is look for debates, right? So there are a lot of topics where there are more than one option. So I'll just give some examples: in-ground pool or above-ground pool, right?
Mm-hmm.
Window air conditioning or HVAC, right? There's a lot of different options where some listings will have one or the other, and people may have strong feelings about A or B. So what we want to do is make sure that we are creating content that maybe helps people decide some of these debates or helps them understand that these options are available to them. Because again, if people care one way or the other, or if they know they're supposed to care one way or the other, we could create content that helps them make that decision or helps affirm their decision. And the last one is milestones. And many of you do this very well with some of the success stories you're already telling. People care about big, special moments, anniversaries, birthdays, right? All of these big moments are special to our audience and they're special to us as individuals, in our communities. So looking for ways to find milestones and celebrate them. If there's something big happening in town, if there are holidays happening, if there are milestones in your customers' lives, these are things that are really helpful for you to acknowledge because people do care about these big special moments and they love being able to share those moments with others. This is why anytime you've ever seen any sort of fundraising effort, with the little thermometer that
Mm-hmm.
shows the progress going all the way up, it's because we all feel like, yes, I contributed to some of that growth going up the way or that number ticking up on the crowd fund, right? So find ways to acknowledge that growth, acknowledge those milestones and share those together with your audience, and they're going to be much more likely to care and see why it impacts or relates to them. So I've got two examples here, and these are actually both really easy for you to implement because just like we were talking about before, these actually help you change something you might do otherwise and just make a slight tweak that's going to allow it to bring that tension right in. So if we look at that next slide, we'll see an example from social media here. So let me just read this out here. So if you see the post here, I'll read it to you. It says, "Trying to buy and sell at the same time is scary." And then there's a quote. It says, "Eric stopped us from making a huge mistake early in the process. When we ran into a tough decision that delayed our closing, he guided us the entire way." So what this did is it's showing the audience, anyone who sees this post, wow, Eric is going to help us keep from making a huge mistake. Well, I don't want to make a huge mistake, so I need to
Mm-hmm.
work with Eric. I've got to know what that huge mistake is. I'm going to click in and learn more about that. So we're not being scary. We're not saying outright, if you don't work with Eric, your whole house is going to come crumbling down, right? What we're doing is we're being realistic and just acknowledging that these kinds of decisions are important and making the right decision is important. We can help you do that. So we'll see another version of this in the next example here, very similar in tone, saying, "Heather sold our cottage in 2 days over asking after being on the market for months." right? So this is showing you the difference. Hey, getting the right person is the difference between selling your cottage in 2 days or being on the market for months, right? So we're showing here's what's at stake in this decision that you're making. We're not being scary, but we're showing you that this is an important decision with important outcomes. It matters to you and you want to make the right choice. Here's some information about how you might do that. So these kind of posts, again, a very simple tweak that you can make to some of the content, the headlines, the social copy you're already using, just to make sure we have a mind for what the stakes for our audience might be, how we can bring that tension in to help them understand why this content matters for them. Any questions coming in on that, Jimmy? Are we good to
Just
move on
great
to the next one?
feedback. We're getting some great feedback from people, and I think people are just absorbing all this information right now. I think the one thing that's important here is, in order to understand tension, and the tension that your customers are experiencing, it all sort of starts with the questions you ask them. And
Yes.
and one of the things that we recently changed with our marketer program. So at Curator, we do it for our customers. We'll call up our customers' clients and we'll actually interview them. And as part of that, we actually ask questions like, "What were you most afraid of? What were you most concerned about? What kept you up at night?" And in an effort to get quotes like this, to get the tension, because typically the way that reviews are asked for in real estate, Melanie, are they look like this. Like, let's say we'll do a role play here, Melanie. You're the realtor, and I'm the realtor. You're the consumer. I'd say, hey,
Yes.
Melanie, just need a review about, like, how great your experience was. Could you just share a little bit?
Yeah, it was good, and we sold it, and it was great, and it sold. So
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, like that's typically how it goes. Like, oh, you were amazing. It was like so helpful. There's no tension. There's no like give and
Yep.
take. So like one of the things we're trying to do is apply that to when we help create stories that can be used across Insta and YouTube and Facebook and retargeting and on the web, on your website,
Yep.
etc. Is like ask those questions that can pull that out of them.
Yeah, you got to find that tension because and this is the thing I always say is like, right, we care deeply about our stories because they're our stories, but our customers care deeply about their stories because it matters to them. So the only way to really ensure we're getting that caring is to make our stories matter to them. And we do that by finding the tension, by understanding their challenges, their fears, their needs, what's at stake, and making sure that the lens of that is really being applied to all the stories we tell.
Love it.
Excellent. So the last one here, the last letter in our TRUTH acronym is H for human connection. And this one is really simple. You don't need a bulleted list of what this means, guys. People care about people. People relate to people. People remember people, right? So much more than a statistic, so much more than a chart. I don't know that any of you could repeat back the statistic I shared with you at the very beginning of this, right? I don't know that you could remember the chart that I showed you and tell me what those numbers looked like, but you probably remember Rusty's story. You probably remember her face, which we'll get back to in a second. But the thing here is that anytime we can find faces and voices to bring into our content, to everything we say, everything we create, everything we publish, find a face, find a voice, and bring it into your content. So I have one example here, but really so many of the stories that you guys tell are excellent ways to bring faces and voices, your own and others, into your content. This is just a good example of personalized follow-up through a video. So this is another, again, you're doing it in an unexpected format. So that's also capitalizing on the uniqueness. I don't know how many of them, if they were meeting with others, would have gotten a video thank you note, right? So that's going to be a little bit unique. So would handwritten. Handwritten would be a unique format for thank you notes these days. Most people just jot off a quick email. So finding ways to bring your actual face, your actual voice, and those of others into your content, doing that through success stories, doing that in your case studies, doing that in your listings even, right? Finding ways to just bring faces and voices into these environments so that people can remember and relate to your content because they see people and they remember the people who are there. So any opportunity you have to find people and share voices and faces is going to have a much bigger impact. So what I want to do now is actually come back to the case study, come back to Rusty's story that we did right in the beginning. We'll skip this and we'll go right to her face because you guys probably remember hearing her story, right? You probably remember that, like I said, more than the statistic, more than the chart. Her story touches us because all of us have a mom or we have kids, one or the other, sometimes both, right? And so this understanding of, okay, losing your children, that means way more to me. I suddenly see myself, or I see someone I know in that story. I find a way to connect with it where I couldn't connect with a chart, or I couldn't connect with a statistic. It just demonstrates the power of bringing faces and voices into the stories that you want to tell. Because truly, Rusty, in sharing her story, is delivering the same message as that chart, the same message as that statistic, but she's doing it in a way we can relate to and remember. Rusty is not just sort of a random woman I found on the internet. Rusty was actually part of a piece of content that I created for Netflix when I worked at the New York Times. I worked there as the first editor of branded content, and it was my job to help all of our brand partners and advertisers tell stories at the New York Times. So Orange is the New Black, which is a show about women in prison on Netflix, came to us and said, we want to talk to your audience about Netflix, about Orange is the New Black, and about this show, which is what it's like to be a woman in prison. So we have a series here that we walked through and created called Women Inmates, Why the Male Model Doesn't Work. And so we wrote this long investigative piece that included all kinds of multimedia about what it's really like to be a woman in prison. So as you go to the next slide, you'll see it was a long written piece. We included different formats. So you'll see here we had photos, written content. There's an audio clip there on the side. You could click that if you are on the page and sort of hear these women tell their stories. There's also infographics because we had a lot of data that was kind of hard to understand. So we wanted to make that really easy for our audience to understand. And the very next slide, you'll see we also had video. So we know video is highly important. So we let women like Rusty tell their stories in their own voice. This is what happened to me. This was my experience and how it impacted my family. And then at the very bottom, we had this little banner that says season 2 now streaming. So many people, marketers like us, would say, well, did this really do anything for the brand, right? Because we love telling stories, but we're not just doing it for fun, right? All of us have a business objective here. We're trying to sell homes, or in the case of Netflix, we're trying to change perception, to reach new customers, to sell subscriptions. But instead of telling you if it worked, because you should know at this point that I'm going to show you instead. So on the next slide, you'll see a picture of David Carr. For those of you who may be media buffs, you might remember David Carr was the media critic at the New York Times. He was featured heavily in the Page One documentary about the establishment, so you may have seen him there. He is an outspoken critic of this kind of branded content, or he was at the time when I joined the New York Times in 2013. He was my idol growing up, wanting to be a journalist. I wanted to be friends with David and, hang out with him and talk about journalism, right? But he was not very pleased that I had been hired to come in and create branded content because he wasn't in favor of it. So when I got to the New York Times, I asked him if he would meet me in the cafeteria and tell me everything I would do wrong to bring 163 years of New York Times integrity crumbling to the ground. And David is very outspoken, so he was happy to do that. He met me down in the cafeteria and he told me everything that I was going to do to ruin the reputation of the New York Times, which was heartbreaking but enlightening. And I took notes and I brought that back up to my team and I said, guys, this is our new Bible, right? This is what we will follow every time we create content. And it was essentially an adapted version of the truth acronym that I've given you today, right? He was worried that we would provide content that didn't give value to our audience. So I wanted to make sure we taught them something. He wanted to make sure that we weren't just quoting our brand partners all the time, but that we were finding real reputable sources. So in that piece, we quoted members of the media, we quoted members who worked inside the prisons, former prisoners, prison reform workers, and activists to make sure that we were really, coming home with reputable sources. He was worried we would create lots of content that just looked the same to everything else and wasn't worthy of the New York Times brand. So we made sure for this piece that we didn't talk just about the people in the show, but we found real people to share their stories for the very first time. He was worried that the stories wouldn't matter much, that it would just be advertising copy that made no difference to our audience. So this story had all kinds of tension built in. There was morality of right and wrong. You had prisoners, you had family separation and reunited, right? There was a lot of built-in tension to this story. And he was also worried that the brands would become the stars of the content we created and we would lose that human connection. So we made sure to bring in real faces and voices to all the content we created. So I was sort of hoping when we wrote that Netflix piece that David would be really, really impressed because, I was still trying to win him over and secretly become his friend. So when we published that Netflix piece, I sent him an email, here you go, David, let me know what you think. And I sort of hit send. And I was waiting and desperately hoping to win his approval. And right around lunchtime, I figured, okay, he's never going to hear from, I'm never going to hear from him. Maybe I'm about to get fired for even asking him what he thinks, right? And my colleague came over and said, hey, did you see David's tweet? And I was like, oh no, what do we got? What is going to happen? So what we saw was this: all brand sponsored journalism does not suck. Witness this speech by Deziel on women in prison from Netflix, naturally, and he linked to the piece. So what was amazing about this was not only was I not fired, that would have made for a horrible story, but we have actually won over our biggest critic inside of the New York Times by following these journalistic best practices. Now, this was wonderful for me as a former journalist, who is now working with brands, to show that we actually sort of lived up to his expectations. But obviously, there were other great measures as well. Netflix wasn't looking for his approval. They did manage to get a lot of impressions on this piece of content. They had really deep engagement with this piece of content. We won some industry awards for best branded video and best branded content execution. And this piece was actually in the top 2% of all content published on the New York Times that year. So let me just say that one more time. This piece of content, sponsored by Netflix, outperformed 98% of the editorial content that the newsroom had created that year, because we followed the same standards. So the reason I tell you this is not because I want you to be like, wow, that's very impressive, I'm going to go read this prison piece. But it's because these are the same best practices that you can follow to create content that performs as well for you, that engages your audience just as well. So on the next slide, I'll remind you of what those 5 are. So it's to teach your audience something. Look for ways to provide really valuable new information to your audience. Teach them something. Bring in reputable sources to make sure that they can trust everything that you tell them. Anytime you can bring in a reputable source, you make yourself more credible by providing more credible information to your audience. Find a unique way to tell a story, if you can't tell a unique story to begin with, by looking at different formats and ways you can bring that story to life. Look for the tension. Find out why your audience should care about the stories that you want to tell. And if you're not sure if they care about it, maybe it's time to re-examine that story and find a more unique way to tell that story so that there is some tension built in. And look for the human connection. Always find a face or a voice to bring into every piece of content you create so that your audience can see themselves in that content and they can feel that this is something that applies to them. It makes it more memorable, and it allows you to show the audience and not just tell them that you are worthy of their time, money, and attention. So on the next slide, I just wanted to leave you with this, that this is the importance of truth and the power of authentic stories. I know that you can use this as a checklist to make all of your content more compelling and more credible, and hopefully start building much deeper relationships with all the members of your audience who may come into the family and be a part of your customer base.
Well, Melanie, it's been an incredible treat. I know you have a new book coming out. If you can pull the slide for me one more time, Eric. You have a book coming out. This is coming out, I believe, next month. Am I not mistaken, or is it?
It is. It's coming out on February 24th. So I think it's 28 days. Not that I'm counting.
And in the book, you cover the truth framework as well as giving other examples that would inspire our community here.
Yes, absolutely. So the book is really focused on the different things you can tell stories about. Those are your focuses, and the formats, the ways you can bring it to life. So if you enjoyed our conversation around the letter U, the uniqueness of what are the different ways I could tell stories, then this would be a big win for you. And you could run through and see a bunch of different ways that you could be bringing your stories to life outside of maybe just writing and video, if that's really your sweet spot right now.
Love it. And what we'll do on the 24th of February, we'll post the link to Amazon to help support you and the book. You've added a tremendous value to our community, which I know everyone here, if you go back in the chat afterwards, you'll see the love and appreciation that you're getting from our community. They absolutely loved everything that you were teaching today. The thing I'll say, and before I let you go here, Melanie, because I'm going to do some housekeeping after you bounce off today's live session, is I remember our team went to Inbound, HubSpot's Inbound conference, maybe it was like a year and a half, 2 years ago. And one of the big Zen takeaways that they left with was they found that HubSpot, who is a prolific creator of content, about 20% of their articles, posts, videos, downloadable guides created like over 85% of the results they got. And this is a philosophy thing for us to really wrap our heads around, which is 2020 is really about the moving into the age of quality. just the absolute sort of distribution of content, the constant need to post and post and post. Like, it's about quality, because quality can actually have not only a significant impact in terms of short term, it has staying power. It lasts. That article that you wrote for the New York Times is going to be around for a very long time. It was top 2% in that year, which is incredible, but it's still adding value many years after it was produced. So for me, the thing I want everyone in our community to really wrap their heads around and begin to appreciate is this pursuit of quality. We want our customers to be a premium brand, and we want people to associate them with that level of professionalism and quality that's required to do so. And that's where you can kind of slow down and say, you know what, I don't need to post 6 times this month. If I kind of just do one really solid one, that actually may have a 10x impact over what I've done in the past. So I'm a huge fan of this, Melanie. Melanie, thank you for being on Curator Refresh. We appreciate you being on. We're going to buy the book in droves here. We're looking forward to reading it, and we got tremendous value from today's session.
Awesome. Thanks for having me and letting me share my story.
Appreciate it. All right, Melanie, we'll see you later. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Bye.
So, guys, a couple quick housekeeping items here for us. And give it up for Melanie in the chat, please. I thought she did a wonderful job. I keep going back to this idea. One of my main goals for the coaching that we're going to provide you this year at Curator is I want to push the limits. I want to bring in outside experts who are exceptionally good at what they do. Melanie was a writer for or a journalist for the New York Times. So we want to bring in these outside experts to help educate us and kind of get us outside of our comfort zones, so we begin to sort of see there's a pretty big world out there that doesn't just look like the same generic, boring real estate marketing that we see every single day. So I am just absolutely passionate about bringing in the best talent from every industry to come teach our community on how to be the best entrepreneurs, best realtors we can become. And Melanie obviously is helping us accomplish that. Speaking of the best, we got Phil M. Jones coming back next week. I can't believe it's already been a month. That first month flew by. Phil M. Jones is coming back next week for Refresh. We're doing a sales coaching live on Refresh, 1 p.m. Eastern. Do me a favor. We had a record attendance last year or last month when Phil was on the show. And one of the things I want to just remind everybody of is make sure your sales team comes along with you. Make sure we broadcast this not just to you, but all of your agents, all your buyers agents. Let's get them joining the conversation. We consider this to be upper echelon, world-class coaching on sales. Phil will be here next week. Him and I will dive into the questions like we did last week. It was a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. So we will be back next Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Last thing, I'm going to be in Hilton Head on Thursday and Friday of this week. So for all of the Curator buds who are in the area, our friend Michael Gonzalez is putting on an event. BYOB, Build Your Own Brand. Connie Carlson, Jessica Woodbeck, and a handful of other Curator, Lisa Archer. A bunch of Curator customers are coming to that event to speak and to participate. I will be there with me and Steve Smith and Phil Jones on Thursday and Friday. So if you guys have a chance to drive or attend last-minute trip to Hilton Head, I heard it's beautiful this time of year. We will be there on Thursday and Friday. I hope to see you guys in person. And our team will drop a link over to Michael Gonzalez's event page, which is byob.com. I think it is, or BYOB 2020. We'll get the link for you guys. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed today's Curator Refresh. Let's have a great week. We're excited about doing some great work here. We'll see you next Monday live with Phil M. Jones.